you need to know in 2025. I'm going to go through this resource that I just put together, how to set up and structure your campaigns, why and when to do, what to do, and how to ultimately set up your Google ad campaigns for success, specifically for lead question that I recently got from a consulting client where they were asking, how do you structure your campaigns? In order for us to know how to structure the Google ad campaigns for search, you need to ask the question of what bidding strategy are you ultimately going to use? That's typically like the biggest question that I get is when to use which bidding strategy and whatnot. So the first thing that you need to ask is ultimately, does Google understand the product or service that you're trying to sell? And so in order to try and figure this out, go into the Google Keyword Planner. And I've got a whole video on how to do proper keyword research. The link is going to be in the description below. And also, I'll just have the video here. So make sure that you flag that so that you can watch that in a second. But ultimately, you need to try and determine, does Google understand the product or service? And the way to do that is when you're in Google Keyword Planner, you can determine this by, is the search volume over 4,000 monthly? And so if it's yes, then you can move on to the next question of, are there more than 4 competitors running Google ads? And so these two things, if they're both yes, then you can follow this path. And I've actually got it to going to maximize conversions. If you set it on maximize conversions, you're ultimately probably going to succeed and see leads coming in fairly quickly, depending on the budget that you have. You need to make sure that conversion tracking is super solid and ready to go, or else it will ultimately fail. And make sure you're not using page views as the conversion objective. Make sure that you use the actual what happens after the lead is captured, whether that's OCI, offline conversion imports, or if it's the thank you page that users go to after they complete the lead gen form. And so you can see here that maximize conversions is a good strategy to use out the gate, even contradictory to what a lot of people say. People say usually just start on a manual or maximize clicks bidding strategy, wait till you have about 15 to 30 conversions, and then switch over to maximize conversions. But I disagree with that. I've tested this in several accounts, and I've seen a lot of success with ultimately just switching it right to maximize conversions with a new account and letting that thing run. Now, this is based off of these two pieces of criteria. And I can determine based off of, does Google understand your product or service, by the fact that there's a lot of search volume and there are more than 4 competitors running Google ads, in which Google is going to have a better understanding of the product or service that you're advertising for. Now, let's just say, theoretically speaking, that the search volume is over 4,000 monthly, but there are not 4 other competitors running Google ads. Now, if you're a local service company, let's just say a hospital or some plumber or something like that, don't necessarily worry about, I would still go to maximize conversions, try that bidding strategy first, because that's something that's more common, people understand. Now, if it's like a new product or service that is very difficult to really know if people know about it or it's common, then that's where I would move over to more keyword-based bidding. So just be aware of that. Now, if you do not have more than 4,000 monthly for search volume, then I would really recommend seeing if there's other competitors, trying to understand, is this a common thing, just like what I was talking about? Is this something that people really understand, or is it something that is way less common and whatnot. Typically, things like that are going to have less than 4 competitors. Now, I'm talking about 4 actual competitors. Oftentimes, you'll get a situation where you've got people bidding on keywords that don't really necessarily make sense. So make sure that you really analyze the competitors and whatnot. So typically just start out with keyword-based bidding. Maximize clicks is a great way to start out, and ultimately using search partners and display network, just set them as off and then use ad groups by theme. Now, before I go on, I just want to ask you to just comment below if you want this resource and get the download for this whole thing so that you can refer to that as you're starting to make decisions. Now, just going further, there's all of these different types of bidding strategies: maximize conversions, tCPA, maximize conversion value, tROAS, Manual CPC, maximize clicks, target, impression, share. I'm not going to go over the definition of each one of these today. More so just go over the circumstances and the situations that you'll want to take into account in order to decide which one to use. But I do want to break up, before we go on, these bidding strategies into 2 different buckets. So smart bidding, which are the newer bidding strategies, they're based off of audiences, what Google understands and knows about the person and the user searching. Now, for the older bidding strategies, these are highly dependent on the keyword and specifically going after not necessarily who is searching, but what they are searching. And so that's why I've broken it up into, is the search volume over 4,000? Are there more than 4 competitors? And really just this understanding of, does Google understand the product and service? If they do not, then you want to go towards keyword-based bidding. It just makes logical sense that you wouldn't want to try and bid based off of what Google doesn't understand. Now, if Google understands, then that's where smart bidding can be incredibly powerful. And so there's a lot of folks out there that are saying smart bidding's the best, and all these things. And it's just like, it's not for every situation. And that's why I wanted to go through this. So these are the things to ask yourself as you're structuring. Now, when you're starting out a new campaign, start out maximize conversions, start on exact match, and then move into broad if you want to. If you're seeing success. If you're not seeing a whole lot of search volume go through on this maximize conversions, then number 1, check your conversion tracking. And then number 2, you can even test going to broad. But make sure that you restrict it with a tCPA or tROAS bidding strategy. And you'll want to structure your campaigns with ad groups by theme, but you want to ensure that based off of your budget, you have the proper amount of ad groups. This is a mistake that I see pretty commonly, and it's just something to watch out for. Again, just before I move on, search partners and display network off to start off, and then possibly test that down the road if you want to. In regards to the ad groups and the number of ad groups that you want to use for maximize conversions and any of these smart bidding strategies is ultimately decided and determined by the number of conversions that you are going to receive monthly or that you can predict. Now, you may not know, but take an educated guess. Just for example, a plumbing company, let's just say every lead is $100. So you'll want to divide the expected cost per conversion by your total monthly budget. So if you have a budget of, let's just say, $3,000, and the cost per conversion is $100, you can be expecting about 30 conversions per month. What you don't want to do is add thematic ad groups based off of themes and have 5 to 6 plus ad groups, even 2 or 3. You really want to stick to just the one. And this is because you're giving Google too much to figure out and work on. These optimizations that Google pretty much works on is based off of the number of conversions. And so it'll optimize quicker if you give it less ad groups to work with. So again, just keep that in mind and make sure that when you're running maximize conversions, you let it go through the first 7 days of the learning phase and then wait 3 conversion cycles and measure after the initial learning phase and conversion cycle. Most people are changing bid strategies like they're changing their underwear, which is every single day. And that's super detrimental when you're using any of these bidding strategies. So let's just say from a scenario standpoint, you're getting conversions. And at that point, then triple down and optimize until you reach a high click share or you're unprofitable. Now, if you're seeing a lot of fluctuations within the performance of the campaign, just make sure that you're not touching the campaign, you're letting it run. Oftentimes, people are trying to optimize these campaigns every day, and that's a major mistake when it comes to maximize conversions, tCPA, maximize conversion value, and tROAS. So just a couple quick tips on that. Make sure that you leave your optimizations at least from a cadence standpoint, at least 30 conversions per ad group, and just let it optimize from there. That way you're giving the algorithm enough time to be able to optimize itself. So again, it's really difficult to use smart bidding and leave it alone. I get it, but do not optimize it as if you're optimizing the keyword-based bidding strategies. So again, there's audience-based bidding strategies, and then there's keyword-based bidding strategies. Let's just say you aren't reaching your cost per conversion goal, then test tCPA and monitor the daily budget. So you'll just go up and test that. Again, give it some time and restrict it. But if you have, for example, $100 per day for the search campaign, and you're only on average over the course of the last 7 days, you're not spending that full $100 a day, then that means that your tCPA goal is too restrictive. What this means is that Google is having a hard time finding audiences. And so this is where you'll want to, instead of having a tCPA goal of 100, you'll want to move that up to 120 and then monitor from there. So just keep that in mind as you're using tCPA. That's the same thing with tROAS. If you're not getting the specific daily amount of spend through, it's because it's too restrictive. So you'll have to open it up and go from a 200 ROAS target down to a 150% ROAS target, for example. So let's say you're getting leads after using tCPA, but you want to focus on more valuable leads. So you're finding that there's a bunch of unqualified leads coming through. So what you'll want to do is expand your data by testing lead versus qualified lead versus sales. So give Google more data on each one of those leads. So you can do that through the form that you're having people go through and ultimately ask qualifying questions and then send the unqualified leads to a different landing page, and don't let that be the primary objective. Now, so that's one way to do it, or you can add values to the lead and sale objective and conversion objective. And this would require for, again, you being able to pipe that data back from the CRM back into Google Ads. So you can test doing maximize conversion to value, or even testing tROAS from a target standpoint. And that would be a great idea, but start with maximize conversion value and then move over to tROAS. Again, if you're not really reaching your maximize conversion value goal, you'll have to be very strategic in what values you assign to the qualified leads versus lead versus sale, and make sure that there's a big difference between the lead and qualified sale. For example, qualified lead from a value standpoint. So just keep that in mind. The other thing when it comes to piping this data back into Google, if you're using offline conversion imports, make sure that these leads are coming in every single day. Don't wait beyond when that conversion actually occurs, because it's going to take longer for Google to optimize. Something that they have stressed when it comes to this smart bidding strategies is ultimately piping in that data pretty much as soon as you get it. And so that would take automating it and whatnot. So just make sure that you look into that. Now, if Google doesn't understand much about your product or service, I typically like to start with maximize clicks, exact match, search partners, and display network off. Use ad groups by theme. And then for all of my basic ad groups, I like to test 2 different ad groups against one another and see which one ultimately performs from a conversion rate standpoint. And so keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. And maximize clicks starts with the clicks and the CPCs starting fairly high and then leveling out as it determines the level of spend, the daily spend, by the amount of clicks. Now, it also expands from exact match to exact match close variant, in which this is where you want to let your optimizations be daily. And so keep it very focused on the things that are very specific to what the product and service are and as high intent as possible. If there isn't much volume there, we're talking 0 to 100, then you might want to consider other top of funnel strategies, whether it's YouTube or Meta. You will not be able to essentially create demand from search. Search is capturing demand. So just keep that in mind when it comes to the search volume. If you're looking for a way to build these campaigns out, specifically search, I've actually got a video linked in the description, as well as just up here if you're looking for that. So we can get out of theory and you can actually see how I specifically set up a campaign. Now, if you're wanting to use a different bidding strategy than what I'm using in the video, then you'll want to make sure you select that. When it comes to maximize clicks, don't set a top CPC limit on it yet. Just let it run. And if you're seeing a pattern of CPCs over a certain amount, just not really converting at an efficient level, then you can set a CPC limit. But make sure that you monitor the spend coming through as you go on. So again, if you're getting conversions, then triple down on that until you reach a high click share or you're unprofitable. And if you need more control over the CPCs, then you can test Manual CPC. If you're trying to show up in the first 4 ads, then I would test out target impression share. This is great for like plumbers or emergency services. So you can test out really ultimately like absolute top of results page, but make sure you've got the specific amount of budget that can accommodate that. Your CPCs are probably going to be very high, and make sure you monitor the average CPCs and conversion rates ultimately. Now, with older bidding strategies and the structure, you can literally do SKAGs, which is single keyword ad groups, if you want. And the ability to maintain that level of control is really powerful, but you have to monitor those exact match close variants because the intent is all over the board and you can waste a lot of money that way. So make sure you have your exclusions in place, preferably before the campaign launches. But if you have to, after the fact that the campaign's launched and adding them in, then do that. If you want to save time doing that, check out my automated negative script. Just comment below in the description. I'll also have a link to that, but it will add negative keywords that are not the specified keywords that you want. And it'll do that automatically on an hourly basis or a daily basis, weekly basis, or monthly basis. So make sure to check that out. It's saved me probably hundreds of hours at this point. So again, this is just a simple structure of how to think about starting a Google lead gen search campaign. Make sure that you check out this resource, comment below if you're interested in this whole document and being able to refer to it as you're thinking through your new campaigns. And again, take a look at a bunch of the other videos I have. I have a bunch of videos on standard shopping and search campaigns, how to set that up. Make sure you check that out. And I can't wait to talk to you next time.